Afternoon, everyone, and I guess good morning for those of you who are in the West Coast. Again, my name is Maritza Jones, and I serve as the Managing Director of Division 2. Wanted to start by thanking you all for joining us today. We asked for your feedback after our first COVID-19 webinar last month, and we heard you loud and clear that the webinar was appreciated by you as an additional method of communication related to all of the decisions that we have made or that our governance structure has made due to the impact of the virus. We have continued our weekly communication following the administrative committee calls every week, but we thought that a second webinar was probably warranted to update you on the actions taken in the past 3 weeks. But before we get started, I wanted to note a few housekeeping items. Unfortunately, due to our capabilities, we will not be taking questions during the webinar, but we do plan, again, just like we did last time, to record the webinar and post it in the Division 2 compliance page on ncaa.org, just like we did again last 3 weeks ago. In addition, as it relates to regulatory matters, more compliance or interpretive matters, our AMA staff has continued to update the Q&A document that was originally posted in late March, and that document also resides in the compliance page. In order to access that page, all you have to do is go to ncaa.org, hover over Division 2, and then click on compliance. So those are just the housekeeping items that I had. So today we're going to cover the actions taken by the administrative committee following our first webinar in late March, so exactly 3 weeks ago actually. Before I turn it over to our AMA staff to start us off, I really did want to take a couple of minutes to provide a couple of quick updates that are really not reflected in the chart. The first one relates to the Division 2 budget. I think I mentioned during our last webinar that due to the cancellation of the Division 1 men's basketball tournament this year, we are now projecting to receive $13.9 million in revenue for Division 2, while our projected expenses are in the range of the $31 million. So we will have to use our reserves to cover almost a $60 million difference. Again, we are fortunate that we had planned for this possibility, and we have a set of budget guidelines and principles that really provide our governance structure with guidance in light of an event such as the one that happened, on how to really determine the use of our reserve dollars. So the administrative committee, as you can imagine, already began evaluating the impact of our decreased revenue for this year. And at the beginning of April, the committee took action that we communicated with all of you to cancel several in-person programs for the remainder of this year. And obviously the decision was not an easy one, but the committee tasked our staff with being creative and determining if any of these programs could be really held virtually. And our staff is working on providing as many offerings as we can in a remote fashion. The committee also made additional recommendations for the Division 2 Planning and Finance Committee and the President's Council to consider during their meetings later this month. And those recommendations are really directed at helping us restore our reserve that we have had or that we will have to use this year. So that's just a quick update on the budget. The second update that I wanted you to have relates to questions that we have started hearing or receiving from several of you regarding possible scenarios for summer and fall. So the national office has created an internal working group with the purpose of really identifying and recommending additional solutions or responses to some of these questions that relate to playing and practice seasons, health and safety, and really that are issues of a national scope that are coming from COVID-19. The work of the intent is that this group looks at items related to summer, preseason, the actual competitive season, and postseason. So we know, again, that you're discussing some of these same issues in your campuses and in your conferences. The hope is that this internal group, again, serves to provide some recommendations to our governance structures, but just rest assured that any recommendations similar to what has been done so far will need to be forwarded to the administrative committee or a governance structure for consideration. So we hope to have more information related to those issues shortly, but just wanted to provide an update. So those are really the two updates that I had. At this point, I will turn it over to my colleague, Angela Red, who will walk us through some of the decisions made in the past 3 weeks.
Thank you, Maritza, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Angela Red, and I'm an Associate Director in Academic and Membership Affairs on the Division II team. And I'm just going to start off by the first item that you see under the recruiting issues relates to the dead period affecting all sports. So the Administrative Committee did extend that dead period in all sports through at least May 31st. The one thing I do want to note here is that there has been a lot of conversation as it relates to those summer camps that are occurring in the June and July months, and how a lot of the income from those camps and clinics is used to supplement operational budgets as well as salaries of staff members. So the committee is fully aware of that and is going to continue to monitor and discuss this item. So in the coming weeks to continue to have those discussions, and we'll adjust and provide any flexibility moving forward as deemed appropriate. The next item is the offering of institutional athletic aid agreements. So the committee adopted a resolution that specifies that institutional athletic aid agreements cannot be issued until April 15th. So now we are in that period where those institutional aid agreements can be issued again. The next item has to do with the institutional camps and clinics during the dead period. And again, this was extended through May 31. Again, in regards to the first comment that I mentioned, they will continue to have some communication in regards to this and the impact that it will have on institutions moving forward. But again, that dead period is in place through at least May 31. The next item in the chart relates to the student athlete involvement in virtual recruitment. So there was a blanket waiver that was issued to permit student athletes to be involved in recruiting correspondence at the direction of a coaching staff member during the dead period that is in place through at least May 31. A couple of things to note here. With any prospective student athletes that have committed, the student athletes can have conversations with those prospective student athletes. With those uncommitted student athletes, so again, those individuals who have not signed a national letter of intent or athletics aid agreement, who have not accepted a written offer of financial aid or admission, and who have not submitted their financial deposit, they can have conversations with those individuals who are high school prospective student athletes graduating in spring, summer of 2020, two-year college prospective student athletes who are transferring for the fall 2020 term, and four-year college transfers who have been granted permission to contact. Again, that blanket waiver only extends to those prospective student athletes, and student athletes would not be permitted to have contact with prospective student athletes who do not fall into those subgroups. The next item on the list is prospective student athletes' involvement in team meetings. So there was a blanket waiver that was issued to permit a committed prospective student athlete to participate in those team meetings, provided there is no physical activities. So the one thing to note with this is any CARA activities that could be occurring during these, again, that cannot involve physical activities if the prospective student athletes are participating, must adhere to the bylaw 17 restrictions on timing of such activities. And then the last item that you see under recruiting issues is it relates to the transcript requirement prior to issuing a national letter of intent or athletics aid agreement. The action that was taken allows an institution to provide a grade report in the event that an unofficial transcript is unavailable. And if a grade report is unavailable, the institution has the opportunity to submit a waiver to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Moving on to reinstatement issues, one item to cover there as it relates to winter sports. Relief was not provided for the season of competition or for providing an extension of eligibility for winter sports student athletes. I'm recognizing that those student athletes didn't have the opportunity to compete for a championship. However, a majority, if not all, of the regular season has occurred, and that was the rationale for that outcome. Moving on to financial aid issues, the first item that you see there as it relates to the adjustments to tuition, fees, room, board cost, and the impact on student athlete athletics aid. So the administrative committee confirmed the following application of financial aid legislation. Institutions are not required to adjust the full granted aid and equivalency calculations if refunds are provided. Student athletes may receive any refunds that are given to the general student body, even if athletics aid paid the initial cost through an athletics aid agreement. Keep in mind that such a refund is an institutional decision. And then third on the list, if an institution does not provide refunds for the spring 2020 term, and instead applies a credit to cost for the 2021 academic year, that credit will now count towards the 2021 equivalencies. The last item under financial aid is the July 1 renewal deadline. So the action that was taken is to keep the deadline as is. Obviously, the committee did discuss as it relates to institutional staff and the impact with COVID that may affect being able to meet this deadline going into the summer months. But in the event that an institution does need an extension of that July 1 deadline, you can file a waiver through the system to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Under awards and benefits, one item to discuss is just the reimbursement of costs associated with a foreign tour. A blanket waiver was issued to provide flexibility for institutions to reimburse student athletes for any cost that was paid for a foreign tour that is canceled. Moving on to transfer eligibility issues. The first on the list is the transfer portal and the permission to contact issues. So the committee provided additional authority to the enforcement staff for violations of a failure to provide permission to contact within the legislative timeframe, which is 14 consecutive calendar days due to COVID-related challenges, to provide flexibility from the normal enforcement penalties. Student athletes would still be automatically granted permission to contact by default by not adhering to the legislative timeframe. And then second, for violations of contacting a student athlete who does not have permission to contact, to provide flexibility to apply the enhanced enforcement penalties for tampering. The next item on the list, as it relates to the impact on four-year college transfer legislation, the committee confirmed that the application of transfer legislation will remain the same. And then second, they referred the review of the runoff guideline to the Committee for Legislative Relief for consideration of COVID-19 impact. So the Committee for Legislative Relief will review the runoff guideline and adjust as they deem fit, and that information will be communicated in the event that anything is changed. Moving on to the next section under academic eligibility issues, the two-year college transfer requirements for prospective student athletes who are impacted by school closures. The committee referred the review of these requirements to the Academic Requirements Committee to provide a recommendation. So the committee will be meeting here in the coming weeks to discuss the two-year college transfer requirements, and the committee will provide a recommendation back to the administrative committee to consider. The next item is the impact on student athletes who are serving an academic year in residence for initial eligibility, transfer, and organized competition. So a blanket waiver was issued to permit student athletes to use the spring 2020 term toward meeting the academic year in residence requirement, even if a student athlete completes the spring 2020 term enrolled less than full-time after beginning the term full-time. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Doug Healy, who works in the Eligibility Center.
Thank you, Angela, and good afternoon. This is Doug Healy from the Eligibility Center. As you may have seen, the Eligibility Center released a Q&A resource earlier today that provides a lot of the operational details, but I'll highlight three of the main topics. The first relates to the alternative initial eligibility standard that will apply to students with an expected spring or summer 2020 graduation date who initially enroll full-time in the 2020-21 academic year. And specifically, students will receive an automatic initial eligibility waiver in the academic certification process if they successfully complete at least 10 core course units before starting the 7th semester of high school and present a 2.2 or higher core GPA in such courses. Now, the goal of this standard, which was developed in conjunction with NCAA research, is to provide flexibility and clarity for students and institutions as quickly as possible. And this applies to both domestic and international students at either a preliminary or final evaluation. It does not include test scores due to the number of recent canceled ACT or SAT administrations. The GPA is calculated on the best 10 core units completed before starting the 7th semester. And we are targeting May 1st to begin applying this criteria to any prospective student athletes who have already received a preliminary evaluation, as well as any evaluations moving forward. The second topic relates to how pass-fail grades will be used in certifications, just given the number of schools that have transitioned to pass-fail courses in spring or summer of 2020. In these scenarios, credits earned in pass-fail courses will apply toward core course requirements, but quality points for these courses will only be used in the GPA calculation if the student's core GPA would increase with their inclusion. Now, this is limited to pass-fail courses that are completed in spring or summer of 2020 that will receive the 2.3 quality points. So this approach would also apply to any current high school freshmen, sophomores, or juniors who are taking pass-fail courses at this point. The third topic relates to flexibility in requiring official academic documents for use in initial eligibility certifications. Essentially, if official documents are unavailable, we will use unofficial documents in the certification, provided they are submitted to the Eligibility Center directly from the email address associated with the student's Eligibility Center account. We anticipate that this may provide some flexibility for international prospective student athletes who are impacted by mail disruption or suspension. As I noted, we encourage you to review the Q&A resource for additional details regarding all the operational components, and would encourage you also to contact the Eligibility Center's customer service team if you have any specific questions. And with that, I will turn it back to Angela for playing and practice seasons.
Thank you, Doug. One item to note under playing and practice season as it relates to the scheduling a foreign tour during an otherwise impermissible period. So the action that was taken is the legislation will remain as is. If relief is needed by an institution, they can file a waiver through the system to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. The next item under membership issues as it relates to the impact of furloughs on membership requirements. So the outcome here is that the legislation remains the same and that waivers may be submitted and be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And then the last item under membership issues is the sports sponsorship requirements for the 2021 academic year. So the committee referred the review of these items to the membership committee to provide a recommendation. So the membership committee will review the sports sponsorship requirements for the 2021 academic year and provide any recommendation to be put forward to the committee to consider. And with that, I will turn it over to Roberta Page, who works in our championship staff.
Thank you, Angela, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roberta Page, and I'm the director within Championships and Alliances at the NCAA and serve as the primary liaison to the Division II Championships Committee. The first championship issue you will see is about the selection requirements for the 2020-21 academic year. The administrative committee had referred a complete review of these requirements to the Championships Committee. This review will take place on their monthly teleconference scheduled for next week and make any necessary recommendations. The second championship issue pertains to potentially delaying the implementation of new playing rule requirements, especially those that would have a financial component attached. The administrative committee has referred this issue to the Playing Rules Oversight Panel, or PROP, to review and come back with a recommendation. PROP will be discussing these potential rule changes with the individual rule sport committees, and this review is currently underway as we speak. The third championship issue pertains to the terms of service for individuals currently serving on regional advisory committees. All regional advisory committees scheduled to serve on a spring RAC will have their term extended for one additional year. And the last final issue there pertains to the terms of service for National Sport Committee members. And the National Sport Committee terms will not be extended for one additional year. Those are the championship issues. And so now I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Maritza Jones.
Thank you, Roberta. So the last four items in the chart relate to different deadlines, legislated or not. We have received questions related to some of these deadlines, and we wanted to provide an update. So some of the deadlines, as you notice, are association-wide, and so since they apply to all three divisions, they will remain as is. Those are the May 18th deadline for institutions to certify that you have a concussion management plan that meets the requirements of the Arrington Settlement Agreement. And I believe that institutions received that information from the Sports Science Institute a few weeks ago. And then the second deadline that will remain as is the deadline for institutions to submit your revenue and expenditures report. The one association-wide deadline that has been extended is the one related to the Board of Governors attestation of sexual violence prevention. So the SSI sent a communication notifying institutions of the extension, but we did want to remind you that the new deadline is June 15. Also, the SSI made available some online educational resources for student athletes, coaches, and administrators to help those institutions that had to cancel in-person education in this area to comply with the requirement. Finally, as you can see in the chart, the July 15 deadline for the Division II membership to submit proposals for the 2021 convention is also scheduled to remain as July 15. So that is really all we have today. I wanted to thank you again for joining us. Also, Please remember that we are thinking of all of you. We are working as hard as we can to support you in these challenging times. So if you need anything from us, please don't hesitate to continue to reach out. Also remember that the webinar will be posted in the compliance page of ncaa.org for those of you, your colleagues who were not able to join us, or if you want to go and watch it again. Again, if you feel these webinars are useful and you would like for us to continue them, please let us know. Send us an email at d2news@ncaa.org. Again, the letter D, the number 2 news@ncaa.org. And that's all we have. Thank you again for joining us, and please take care of yourself.